when you want to record a video because you're having a sort of kind of good hair day. Hi everybody, welcome to another reading wrap-up. I kind of read a bunch of random stuff. I'll start with the book probably that impressed me the most and that really was something different than what I've read before. Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is a time-traveling book. This black woman in the 1970s ends up traveling back through time to the antebellum South. It's somebody that's related to her where she ends up going, and it's her kind of going back and forth, seeing what it's like for her to be taken back then and what that does to her psychologically. Octavia E. Butler's writing is just really good. She has this kind of suspense that she employs, and she makes you nervous about what's going to happen to the main character. She'll start really, trivial, like, oh, something bad's happening, but then it just gets aggressively worse, amps up the suspense, and then you just get more and more frightened. The villain in the book, you go back and forth between feeling sympathy and also feeling like this is a horrible person, and trying to understand and being able to place him in the time period that he was born, but also understanding that what he is doing is not something that we should aspire to be. Really, we are all related to people that we might not necessarily agree with. It's good to understand where they have their mind at and where they're coming from. Even if after we learn this information, it doesn't make it all hunky-dory. What really attracted me to this book was the time travel aspect of it, but what I really came away feeling is that I need to read more books that have plots that are related to historical events. I read historical fiction, but the type of historical fiction I read is it's going on in the background, but it doesn't change the way the characters want to do things. It had her go back there. She had to act like a slave, even though she's from the 1970s, so that isn't her experience, but it was her ancestors' experience, and her being taken back to the antebellum South made her, the history going on in the background impacted her and changed how she's going to act in that period. I also really enjoyed not just the diversity that you see, but even the diversity in the diversity. So the fact that there are so many different kinds of slave experiences that she is witnessing. There's some slaves that are more, they want to rock the boat and really escape, while there are others that are kind of just like, okay, this is my life and this is what I'm going to make of it. I'm going to stay put. The main character understands why someone would want to just stay put. Not staying put means violence towards them. And also the complexity between the master and slave relationship, she really delved into that. And it's something that I feel like I'm aware of and I have read about it, but it's good to be placed in it in a fictional setting. You could see both how these two people who are basically on opposite sides of freedom can still have this relationship where there is some kind of love and empathy and feelings, but at the same time it's wrong also. So you can see how very complex it is, and that's one thing that whenever I read anything that has to do with this time period, I'm always flabbergasted by how difficult relationships are. We think it's so black and white, but it's really not that way, and you can see that in this book with some of the characters. I really like the mechanics of the time traveling too. It's not necessarily tit for tat, there's a year goes by here, it means that a year's going by where she's from. If you're gone from your main present time period and you go back to the antebellum South, what does it mean when you come back? How much time has elapsed in the world where you are actually from in the future? Basically, this book was not plain. You'll really enjoy it because of Octavia E. Butler's writing, because of the time travel aspect and how interesting that plotline could be, and just the in general suspense that you feel and the characters you get to know. The next few I'll talk about are more children's kind of books, and I read Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, so this is the last Harry Potter. Guys, I finished! Until The Cursed Child comes out, but I finished! I'm really happy that I read this series. I definitely don't think that the 7th book is my favorite. I think the 6th book is. I think that's probably because I was kind of more spoiled for this one than I was for the 6th one, which you wouldn't really expect. I have a theory about this. I think it's because when the 7th movies came out, that's when I first started getting into Tumblr, so there were a lot of gifs and ideas and theories being thrown around on Tumblr, and I absorbed some of that. So I knew a lot of the major deaths that occurred in the 7th book. I didn't really cry because I was sad that characters were dying. I was crying because I was overwhelmed by how much was happening at once. An overwhelming book, but in a good way. And I also think one thing that what makes me like the 6th book more, not just because of Dumbledore, there's no Hogwarts in the background. It was more them just going around all over the place, which was interesting, but sometimes I kind of missed having the rigidity of the Hogwarts schedule. This book tied everything up, and I'm really happy that I ended up reading this series. It took me a long time, but I finally did it. The next book that I'll talk about is The Invention of Hugo Cabret, and this is by Brian Selznic. This is a book that is mostly told in pictures, and then it has words and stories as well. It has a couple of different stories in it that are all connected. And I wanted emotion, some real tears. I wanted it to be really deep. And I felt that it was more kind of on the nose than I wanted it to be. It was just a lot more like explicit, this is what's happening, instead of like subtle, oh, this is what's happening. I understand it's a children's book, but at the same time, I kind of expected it to be more emotional. Overall, just the fact that it was a completely different format than what I'm used to reading, having pictures is really good for me, who is a visual person. I really liked the way that helped me visualize the scenes that the author was really trying to convey to the reader. Didn't really leave that note where I just like left it a total wreck, which is what I thought was going to end up happening. But overall, a good book, and one that I would suggest you reading just because of how different the style is. The last book I want to talk about is the first book in the series of unfortunate events, The Bad Beginning, the first book. Like, guys, what's wrong with me? Like, this is how you can tell my parents never put these books in my hands. I got into this book. I read this one with my boyfriend for our book club, and we both really enjoyed it. I think I enjoyed it a little bit more than he did. It has the style of humor and the tone that I was looking for. I like that kind of humor where there's like a lot of crappy stuff going on and it's depressing, but really like they're fictional characters, so I'm not like broken inside over these characters because they are fictional. I really liked the characters. Like, I really enjoyed Violet and her hobbies, as well as Klaus and his hobbies. I even really enjoyed the older adult characters, which I don't necessarily love adult characters in children's books, but they were very entertaining. It's the way Lemony Snicket writes, really. It still made me smile. Like, the kinds of situations that they are placed in and the kinds of things they end up doing to appease the grown-ups and to escape, they all made me smile, which I don't know if that says something about me as a person, but I really enjoyed this book because it was dark and depressing, and it used that in a humorous way. So there's 12 more to go, and I'm going to continue reading them. I hope you've been reading some great stuff. That's all I have for this video, and I will see you in my next one. Bye-bye! And my garden has started to grow, which is making me so excited. As a Florida girl, these things don't happen where I'm from. Like, we don't get winter and spring. So it's really cool. Like, these literally have come in the past 2 days. It makes me really excited. They're so cute. I'm excited for all of this to be filled with flowers.